This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast, and it's time to party. Hope everybody is doing well out there. All my people in the Midwest, stay strong. I know you got some crazy snow out there. All my people on the East Coast, I don't really know what you guys are doing, so I'm just going to assume you're cool. West Coast people, I hope everybody who went out to Coachella had a blast. I do want to give a special shout out to 3 alumni of the show who played this year: AC Slater, Party Favor, and Dioro. If you're listening right now and you have not heard their episodes of this show, you got to go back and check them out. So good. Congratulations to those guys. My guest on the show today does not hail from any of those places I just listed, because my guest is Laidback Luke, the one and only, a guy who truly has earned legendary status in the game. Laidback Luke's new collaboration with Steve Aoki is called It's Time, and it's out right now. The link to that and all of Laidback Luke's tour dates, music, vlogs, everything will be in the description of this show. Before we get into that, let's take care of the business. Shout out to everyone who's left us a rating and a review on iTunes. That really helps this show out. And do not forget to subscribe to this show. Not only does it help us out, but trust me, it is just as good for you. You never have to worry about missing an episode of this show again. All of it is free. You just click the subscribe button, and each week a new episode shows up on your phone, your tablet, your computer, your sex bot, the simulation in which we all live, YouTube, SoundCloud, doesn't matter where. Whatever your favorite outlet is, we are there waiting for you. And if you want to hear any of the music mentioned on this show, any of the music from my guests, myself, related music, related artists, all the freshest sounds, you got to go check out the new Spotify playlist called Back to Bangers. I update that each week with all the music from the show. It's awesome. The link is in the description of this episode. And don't forget, you can get in touch with me at backtobackpod@gmail.com. Always happy to talk to you guys, answer some questions. The community really is the best part of doing this show. All right, so for this conversation with Laidback Luke, we met up at a friend's studio in Southern California, and he was a little late because he was just coming from Kung Fu. For those who don't know, Laidback Luke, also a Kung Fu master, in addition to being a famous DJ. Not a very common combination. Somehow, in the middle of all of his production, touring, everything, he's managed to compete in the World Championships of Kung Fu multiple times, taken away multiple gold medals. It's sort of crazy to think about. We talk a little bit about that, but overall, what I really wanted to get into is just what makes this guy tick. Because here's a musician responsible not only for some pretty influential music along the way, but also being the gateway to a lot of young producers through his forums, through his mentorship. There's so many well-known producers in the game now who got their start with Laidback Luke. I'm talking about people like Avicii, Afrojack. If you go back and listen to my episode with GTA, you can hear them talk about how Laidback Luke really gave them a forum to start their career. And now Luke has become a really outspoken person in the dance music world. And whether you agree or disagree with him, and I know plenty of people who disagree with him, I always respect people who do take strong stances in this culture, because I think, again, agree or disagree, the more people we have who take passionate stances about where we're headed as a music community, a music industry, the stronger we all become collectively. So with that being said, let's get into this right now. Fascinating conversation. This is me and Laidback Luke, back to back. Let's go. You're playing a show tonight, which I was thinking about driving over here, I feel like you are just always on tour. Like it's just kind of a constant. When was the last time you had a significant chunk of time off the road?
Well, interestingly enough, that came last month with a bunch of cancellations. I originally had 2 shows in China that got canceled. I had a show in London, which was snowed in. I couldn't make it out to London. So all of a sudden, I had a couple of weekends off, and this was the first time in 8 years at least. That
8 years?
Yeah. So usually, it's just touring all year round.
What did you do with yourself? That must have been weird.
I kind of felt out of a job. No, obviously, my family life is very busy, and it gave me finally sufficient time to, go and see my dad, hang out with my dad and brother. And I remember before I used to go on tour, every Saturday I used to play tennis with my dad and brother, and that got ripped out of its sockets when I started touring.
Where do they live now?
So they live in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were saying right before we pressed record that you're kind of just back and forth between there and the States sort of all the time, right?
All the time,
If not even for work, then just for family or anything.
Absolutely, yeah. So I have 2 sons in the Netherlands. They're quite old now because I'm even older. It's they're 17 and 15 now.
Wow.
So every 2 weeks I see them for a couple of days. I have a daughter in New York. She is turning 4. I see her every 2 weeks. And then I have my girlfriend in Texas. We have a little apartment there where we stay. And so, I guess in a 2.5 week cycle, I'll do those 3 locations.
That's amazing, man. And to think about what you just said made me tired just now. And that's even before you start talking about all the actual touring,
right?
And the shows and the music. It's sort of amazing to me. Even setting up this podcast that we're doing right now, I was really impressed because I know a lot of super busy musicians like yourself who have kind of just a controlled, maybe, but mostly just chaotic life all the time, you know? But with you, I sort of got this sense you were very prompt. You just replied right back. You said, okay, this day, this time. And I felt pretty confident that that's what it would be. And you kind of just give off this air, I think, that, you lead a pretty regimented life. It seems like the machine runs pretty smoothly overall. And that's interesting to me because I feel like that's not something a lot of people at your level could say.
That's a great observation. And tell you what, that's the secret to me maximizing my time. Literally everything I do is scheduled out. And every bracket of time is filled with, whatever I can do. And sometimes people ask me like, oh, you must have someone that edits your vlog, right? And no, I do that myself. Yeah. Oh, you must have someone that runs your Instagram or your Twitter. And no, that's me. And all those replies, that's me.
It's incredible.
And doing Kung Fu on a high level and, even like competing at the World Championships on the side and having a busy family life. It's all down to maximizing time. And it's funny, about like a month ago, I put on Twitter, I said, can someone ask Oliver Heldens and Tujamo to answer their emails? Because I've been literally like following up with them for a bunch of weeks and no reply.
Right.
And funny enough, when I posted that on Twitter, they started replying to me.
Of course.
And their replies were mainly, we're not as organized as you, Luke. And that's just a thing I do. And it's very beneficial to get things done.
Right. Well, obviously. And, I was impressed by that. Have you always been that way? Were you like that as a kid, super organized?
Interestingly enough, and this is funny. This is not out there. This has never come across in an interview. So I'll tell you. So when I was a teenager, I got bullied at a certain point. I didn't have many friends. Actually, there was one summer I only had myself to entertain pretty much. I remember sitting bored at home, not having any friends to play. And I was like, you know what, I should just start doing something with my time. So I started sketching out time schedules for the day. So morning, I was very much always into working out. So morning workout routines, then I start drawing, then I start doing this. And I had the whole day scheduled out. And
What age was this?
this must have been 13.
Okay.
Yeah. Towards the end of the day, when I knocked off all my schedule, I was like, wow, this day was so productive. And I wasn't bored for a second. I'll just keep on doing this. And so that kind of stuck with me, really.
That's so interesting. Wow. And what did your family do? What did your parents do?
My dad is a mechanical engineer. And my mom, she just does the simple work, like, distribution, a lot of factory work.
Okay.
So my dad is Dutch. My mom is Filipina. And they both live in the Netherlands right now.
And that's where you grew up as well, right?
So I was born in Manila in the Philippines. And at the age of 4, I started to live in the Netherlands and grew up there. Yeah.
I have so little concept of what growing up in the Netherlands in the 80s and 90s would have been like. I mean, I've been there a few times, but as an adult,
Right.
What was it like just being a kid there? I mean, what would you, other than make time schedules, what would you do for fun as a kid?
Interestingly enough, so I'm just going to give you, I'm just going to flip it back to you. Interestingly enough, you have a lot of these French awesome movie directors and video directors. Obviously, you have Stranger Things right now. The 80s, America in the 80s was like utopia to us. And Pepsi and McDonald's and that sort of thing. And we didn't really have that yet over in Europe.
Not as much sort of in-your-face pop culture kind of stuff.
Not at all. Well, like we could only see that from TV and movies like E.T. and Michael Jackson, and that was all like, oh, that's America, and you need to be there one day. And so that was very exotic to us. And that kind of stuck with all those directors, becoming 20 years old and still having that obsession with America in the American golden ages,
right?
I would say.
That's interesting. So do you think your pop culture in the Netherlands at that time was sort of an aspirational reflection of what was going on in the U.S., sort of filtered into Dutch culture in some way?
This must have been... Well, apart from the 70s where people the hippie scene got through to Europe as well. But yeah, we tried. Like, I think this was the first time that the American culture crossed over onto, like, because I must have been like 7 or 8 and I started breakdancing and that sort of thing and graffiti. And it was all from America. And we started trying to mimic that and everything. What's interesting about the European culture is that it's very down to earth. Like, we don't have that mentality. Like, people over here come without money, and then how's that called?
The
in
American
English?
dream.
The American dream.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
Right.
Very simply put, if I play in the Netherlands, then the crowd is very low key. Even if they like a track or they're having the night of their life, they won't cheer, they won't clap much.
Right.
Sometimes they look up from their drink and they're like nodding at me. That's like a cool track.
That's when you know it's really good.
And so in the Netherlands we have the saying, act normal, that's strange enough, or act normal, that's jolly enough. And whereas in America, it's like, everyone cheers, and if you're the guy that's not cheering, everyone looks at you. Well, like, why are you not,
Right.
And in the Netherlands, it's different. For instance, recently I went to the new Star Wars movie, and it finished, and I was like, whoa, yeah, whoa! And the people at the movie theater were looking at me like.
Then you were asked.
And
to
I was
leave,
like, I'm sorry, like, I'm in America all the time.
You've assimilated.
So that's number one in Europe, where it's everything's just very down to earth. But the other thing is as well, like, we very much shoot from the hip. Like, if we have an opinion on something, but even if you're like best friends, or even in my case, like fans that have been coming out to my shows. If I put out a sucky song they don't like, they'll tell me
You'll
instantly.
hear about it, yeah.
And this is even without the Twitter. This is them, like, I'm finished with DJing and I meet them after my show and they'll say straight up in my face, "Hey man, your new track sucks." Like, I'm not feeling that. And,
Right.
But in the Netherlands, that's not an offense. So
Sure, you're able
yeah.
to kind of just take it as an honest critique.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a lot of that. And I must say, I needed to kind of get used to that because I came into the States and I was conversing with people and being, straight up. And I was like, "Oh, that's very different here." People like make circles around their
Right.
opinion. You kind of like need to, and it was tough to like cherry pick, go back into my mind, like what were they actually meaning by that?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I think there's parallels to music there too, because if you grew up, playing to more reserved crowds, kind of cutting your teeth with really difficult crowds, that's sort of like in baseball when they have the donut on the bat when they're swaying before they actually go to bat, you make it a little harder for yourself.
I have no clue what that means.
Which is I don't
grown
even,
up in Europe without baseball.
Well, it's really weird that I made that because I know nothing about sports.
Oh, okay.
But I promise that's a real thing. All it really means is that you put yourself in a more difficult situation so that when you're really there and need to perform, it's almost like you're lighter. It's just easier to do.
Tell you what, this is the secret of why the first wave of EDM DJs were that many Dutchmen, because we were used to doing our rounds in the Netherlands playing for the most sucky crowds. And I've said this many times in interviews, and that's why I'm shooting it from the hip as well. In the Netherlands, they don't care if I call them sucky crowd. And came over here, or even like playing in Italy or in France, I put a good track up and everyone's hands got in the air. And after I finished playing, I was like, I feel like Superman. Like, what happened? And this is why, guys like Chucky, but even Afrojack and myself and Sidney Sampson, we always put so much effort into DJing, mixing fast and picking out the right tracks and lots of effects just to get the Dutch crowd going a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just had Dr. P on the show as well, and he was saying the same thing about the UK, that the first time he came to the States from there, he was just blown away by, how much crazier the crowds were. And just, I guess it's an entirely different culture because in America, right, we didn't necessarily have those same references. We're newer to dance music in general. And it makes me wonder, what was the music scene like for you as a kid, especially, going into your teenage years? What was going on musically that was kind of catching your ear? Or were you involved in music as a kid?
Well, a monumental thing happened in 1989 in the Netherlands, and that's Lil Louis, French Kiss. If you don't know the track, look it up, Lil Louis, French Kiss, which is basically a techno track without any vocal.
Yep.
Went straight up to #1 in the Dutch pop charts, 1989. And this came along with like the whole hype of like, there's this new underground thing, it's called house music. They started releasing house music compilations, and this was very much a pop type of culture when I started growing up. I remember walking my paper route as a 15-year-old boy, buying Turn Up the Bass, and the compilation was called House Party.
Nice.
And I had it on my Walkman with cassette. Yes, I'm that old. And just kept on playing it during my paper route. And I just imagined myself being in dark warehouses with a lot of strobe and that sort of thing. And so...
Had you been to events like that?
No, but I saw it on TV. And I was like, oh, I really want to go to those. And I really loved the music, that steady kick drum. And it was super electronic. And there were some vocals here and there as well. But it really caught my attention. And so from there on, I was hooked to electronic dance music.
And it sounds like, I mean, if that French Kiss went to #1, that maybe there was sort of a national appetite for it. I mean, was it sort of more mainstream than maybe in some other countries at that point?
Yeah, so mainly, predominantly the UK and the Netherlands were, Germany as well. Those three countries got hooked instantly. Fun fact, though, Lil Louis, I think he's a guy from Detroit or New York.
Yeah, I want to say New York, but yeah.
So, it began in the States, but it went overground in Europe real fast.
Right. It's so interesting, yeah, that, sometimes we'll send culture off from the States that isn't really popping or bubbling or anything here. And then someone else's culture takes it and sort of mutates it. And then by the time it gets back to us, that's when we want it. It's a really weird.
And it took so long for it to come back in the States. And I do remember playing big warehouse parties in like the end of the 90s, and all the ravers were wearing these big pants.
Yes, I was one of those ravers.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And the teddy bear backpacks and big earrings and all that. And I was fascinated with that because being grown up in Europe, I did absolutely not know anything about the American rave culture. And when I saw it, I was like, this is so much cooler than in Europe. Like those skater pants and that sort of thing.
It was
like,
a lot more expressive, I think.
Over at ours, it was very different. Like we did have a kind of like how it started in the States as well, in New York and everything, where it was a big transvestite type of gay community and everything. And no offense against gay people and everything, but those weren't wearing skater pants. And like for all I knew, they wore like leather pants and that sort of thing. And I thought like the American ravers looked way cooler, like with the hats and everything, and the way they were dancing as well, like pop locking and that sort of thing was this typical raver step. And we were kind of more like voguing in Europe, I guess.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I think, so much of the roots of dance music, when you really trace it back, a lot of it does go back to queer culture and this minority culture. And that's something I think about all the time in the modern era, because especially in the States now, obviously dance music is having a moment. There's been a big explosion in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's brought a lot of benefits. I mean, it's always great to see the music you love be loved by lots of people, but it's also maybe brought in, issues of culture that I personally think about a lot in terms of that we don't want kind of the roots of it to get lost, And with so much of it becoming mainstream now, and maybe a lot of the people who are getting into dance music in the last 3-5 years, not necessarily knowing the roots of it, which is fine. There's no reason to expect them to know that. But I do wonder sometimes how we, as people being involved in the scene, can sort of curate that culture and try to, expose where it comes from and really the ideals it was built on, without seeming preachy or without seeming just kind of like an old guy on the porch,
So yeah, that's a tricky thing. That's where I often get caught on Twitter trying to preserve the art of DJing and that sort of thing. Like, I do sometimes feel like an old fart, like tweeting. And it seems like everyone's forgotten or the new generation is not interested. But yeah, for me personally, I do think it's real important because it gives substance. It gives, a reason why things are the way they are, why, DJs shouldn't play certain tracks before another DJ, or why we shouldn't be satisfied with pre-recorded sets and that sort of thing. But, culture-wise as well, dance music was never a pop culture.
Right.
It was indeed the Renegades. It was a niche.
It's a place for outsiders.
Yeah, outsiders to feel accepted.
How did you start actually having the thought that maybe I could actually make this kind of music that you were enjoying?
Well, I come from a musical family. Both of my families are full of musicians. My dad plays guitar and bass, but my mom would perform whenever we would have like family gatherings. She would have her own show in the living room with like a banner hung up, and she would do like costume changes, and she would like for a good 3 hours would come up and sing and perform. And my dad would make the background music for that. He had a little drum computer set up and he would play the guitar.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that's how I grew up. And my brother is an incredible musician, so he plays a lot of instruments, but he's an incredible drummer. Like he can drum with all limbs, and he drums punk music, so on a very high BPM. So I grew up with that. He's my younger brother, but I was always the the guy that I was kind of like, my motor skills weren't as developed as theirs. So whenever I tried drumming something or playing the guitar and I would screw up, the family would laugh like, oh, yeah, that's typically Luke. Like, oh, just don't mind him, you know. He doesn't really have it. And so when I found out at the age of 15 that I was able to make music with a computer and I could program my notes, I could program beats, I could actually take the track I loved most back then, Technotronic Pump Up the Jam, which is typically a hip-hop house kind of blend as well.
Sound,
And so, when I found that out, I was like, this is it. Because I had all this music stuck in my head. I was like, now I can just program it.
That's interesting. So you wanted to participate, but just hadn't found the means to do it.
Exactly.
In those days, I mean, what kind of equipment were you even using?
So 15-year-old Luke was in 1992. And so this was about the year the first Sound Blaster sound card came out on the personal computer.
Yes.
So, but the sounds on there sucked. So I could borrow an Atari ST from my uncle, and it ran Cubase. And within that, I begged my girlfriend to borrow some money from her. I borrowed about $1,500 to buy my first synthesizer, a Roland D5, and through MIDI. Yes, MIDI. Wow. I was able to get notes out of my synthesizer with Cubase. So I started with that.
And what kind of music were you making in those early days, or at least what kind of music did you want to make?
So it was a blend because the Netherlands is right next to the UK. We did get a lot of the UK rave music, so I was a big fan of The Prodigy.
Yes.
So a lot of my stuff was breakbeat ravey.
That's my roots right there, man. That's some of my most favorite.
And but soon I got really inspired by MK actually. A lot of his Strictly Rhythm releases, his Nightcrawlers, Push the Feeling On, Burning. And that sort of thing. And I still have like a demo on cassette tape, and every single track on there sounds like something from MK. So I was making house music meets rave.
Sure. Which is, I think, a pretty good way for anyone to start off with production, is kind of to, try to make your favorite sounds.
Absolutely.
And I always tell people that I think that's maybe one of the best learning tools to figure out if you actually want to make your favorite piece of music. Sit down and try to do it. And you probably won't be able to, but you will learn a lot about how they did do it.
Yeah. No, that's some solid advice. I do have one big problem with that, is that I often get kids tweeting me or wanting me to listen to a demo of their first track they did.
Yes.
And that's a problem because I always tell them, like, I'm not interested in your first track, because later down the line, a few years later, you'll listen to your first track and you'll think, oh my goodness, why did I send that to Luke? I'm so much better now.
Yes.
And I often tell kids, wait until the 10th track, or better yet, wait until the 100th track, because I am actually out there looking to sign someone that's good enough. And if this is your shot, you really don't want to come at me with your first track.
Right. Because, first impressions are everything, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same way. If somebody sends me a demo and it's incredible, and I've never heard of them before, all of a sudden, they go to the top of the list in my mental list of, people to pay attention to, because it's this new, exciting talent. But if somebody just sends me a track that's pretty good and I've never heard of them before, I'll just say, yeah, cool track. And, maybe just because I'm an idiot, I'll forget their name and that'll kind of be it, And I think those first impressions are everything. If you can be patient, which is hard to do in the age of social media, but if you can take that time and really be confident in your first track and really have that perspective of, is this as good as everyone I'm trying to be on the same level as?
Well, so interestingly enough, sometimes this doesn't even hit with young producers, and they'll still be very impatient. But I often try and compare it to sports. So I've been in this business for more than 20 years. So you can see me as like a football coach. I was a pro for 20 years, pro level football, that sort of thing. You buy a football from the store and you give it one kick and then you come at me and you say, I'm ready for the major league. Here I am. I have a football. I can kick it. Sign me now. And so sometimes that puts things in perspective because you first need to practice. Then you got to become really good. Then you got to go through amateur league. And then you got to go, and so that's exactly the same with producing and DJing.
Right. Well, what was your amateur league? In those early years when you started producing music, how long did it take from, the first time you sat down and made a beat to a point where you reached that somebody else might want to hear what you were doing?
Well, so I actually was one of the first Martin Garrixes of the Netherlands, where I was this young kid making tracks that everyone liked. So 1992, I started making my first tracks. And in 1995, wow, only 3 years. Seemed way longer.
I'm sure.
Only 3 years I landed my first record deal.
Well, I mean, you got to think, at age 15 to 18, that's a lifetime of experience, right?
Yeah, it was. So by that time, I was ready. And when my first record came out, we had a bunch of big DJs replying that, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Chocolate Puma, because those are the guys that discovered me. They heard 15-year-old Luke making shitty music, but they heard the talent.
Right.
And at a certain point they said, oh, like, we have half of our studio equipment stored somewhere. Would you want to have a go at that? And I was like, yeah, for sure. They had like drum computers, synthesizers, and this was like my big break. So
right.
They literally put all of that in my bedroom, and I remember going to school with like manuals of synthesizers and just going through them. But that instantly upped my professional level of sounding.
At that time, this early on, were you already thinking that music could be what you do for the rest of your life, that it could be a career?
I absolutely knew the first time I discovered I could make music on a computer that it was something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I never hoped or dreamed that I could actually make money and a living off of it. But I do remember this one time I was... I guess this was another lonely summer. I was locked up in my bedroom for weeks, making music, 8 hours, 9 hours a day. All of a sudden, my dad rushes into the bedroom. He says, I just got to interrupt you here. Like, what are you doing? Like, what? I know you love this music thing and everything. Should you not, like, focus on a real job and a real career and that sort of thing? What makes you think that from all those thousands of kids that now want to break through, like, what makes you think that you could actually pull this off?
Reasonable question from a dad.
Yeah, so I said to him, you just watch me. And so I always aimed high. I always wanted to become like a top level. And I just pursued. And
were there examples of that in that era? I mean, did you sort of look at somebody, maybe Chocolate Puma or somebody like that, and think, that's what I'm trying to get to. I want to be like that.
No, I just wanted to be the best, really. But with DJing as well, sometimes I just get so obsessed with something, and I do set a goal. I just don't want to be like, I had this one time where I DJ'd with Dave Clark, who was my techno example.
Yeah,
very skilled DJ. This was my first breakthrough year in 2001. I was DJing before him, and I knew about his skills, and I had developed some skills, and so he got on. I was playing the last track, and I was like pulling all my skills out, and I was like, oh, okay, this'll get him. And he didn't really blink, or he didn't really say hi to me when he took over the decks. And within his first track, he pulled all the effects out, started scratching over the effects, and it was like utter chaos of technical abilities until the beat dropped, and I was like, okay, game over. Back to the studio. But that motivated me to develop my skills even more, and it was those sort of moments where you see yourself come across yourself that you think, oh, so back to the drawing board. I'll need to improve if I really want to be the best.
Well, and so what happened in 2000, 2001 to kind of give you that first boost, that first breakthrough? Was there one moment that kind of took you there to where you started, traveling a bit, doing some shows, being known on a different level?
Well, this was the year. Oh, this was the year after I gave up on techno. So I started. My first breakthrough was as a techno DJ, techno producer, because Carl Cox started supporting one of my remixes.
Was that the Green Velvet?
Exactly, Green Velvet, The Stalker. And that gave me an international breakthrough. And I remember doing an interview with Music Magazine. And the guys were in Amsterdam interviewing me. And fun fact, it was the edition where they named all the new talents from that year. And Daft Punk was on the cover as new breakthrough talent. And little old me was in there as well. Picture of Amsterdam and one to watch. And the guys asked me if I DJ'd. And I had been DJing for about a year in my studio a little bit. I said, yeah, I DJ. And they were like, okay, so do you want to come to the UK and play a party for us? That sprouted my my DJ career. So I got known as a techno DJ, played with a lot of legends, met a lot of legends. Derek May, like I was really hyped back then. Derek May, I met him several times and he was like, yeah, I dig your stuff.
That's huge.
Dig your DJing. But at a certain point, I got stuck in making techno because it got very repetitive. A lot of techno is just drum programming. Even with the sounds in there, it's just drum programming. And I wanted more. I wanted to write vocals. I wanted to write chords. I wanted to write songs. And techno wouldn't allow me to do that.
The form was a little constraining after a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
At a certain point, I couldn't make music anymore. And this was... So I was at a crossroad back then. I was like, okay, so I'll just quit DJing and producing. Or I give myself the freedom to make whatever the heck I want. And so I chose for the latter, and this resulted in me having a much poppier sound, which eventually got me signed to Virgin Records.
Right.
And I got totally into that realm of, like, luckily Daft Punk was in there, but even Phoenix started there, and Superfunk, and that sort of filter disco-y thing.
Yeah, that was an exciting era. I remember that.
So I was in the middle of that as well, and so that took my career to a whole new level. I started presenting shows on the local MTV. I started doing videos. I started doing live performances as well.
Oh,
with,
interesting.
like promoting my Electronic Satisfaction album. So yeah, now you know why it's called Electronic Satisfaction, because I finally found my ways.
Right. Did you get any pushback from the techno world that you had come from?
Oh, yeah.
When you made that switch?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. They didn't understand it, and it didn't matter how much I explained. And mind you, I wasn't going after the big money, because the big money in those early 2000s was trance. I wasn't into trance. I was never into trance. I was more into like Daft Punk and that sort of alternative indie rock, indie type of electro house. Miss Kitten and Antigua and that sort of thing. So I was never interested in that. I did it for artistic reasons, and no one ever really got it in the techno scene.
Well, it's interesting to me, and this isn't a new concept, but there's these forms like techno that are in theory very intellectual forms of music. High-minded. Maybe somebody who doesn't like techno would say pretentious, but. And I love techno personally, but it's interesting because I find with those kinds of scenes, they're less tolerant of other sounds. Whereas when you make the move and do something a little more mainstream, in a weird way, the mainstream, I've found personally to be more accepting of outsider sounds. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a great point. That's one I've always said throughout the years. I remember once I loved Lady, Mojo, Lady, that song.
Yeah.
But compared to the techno I was playing, the beats were too fluffy. They weren't really there. So I mixed that track as a live bootleg on vinyl. I mixed the two with Speedy J's beats and then Mojo Lady on top. And every time I played it, I pissed off so many techno heads. And at a certain point, my agent said, you can't do that. You're pissing people off. You can't play vocals.
Really?
What
He
are you
thought it
doing?"
was maybe even hurting your business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, "You can't do that." And so a couple of years later, I'm playing for a mainstream crowd. I do the same exact combo, and they dance their asses off. And so, yeah, I found the same thing for a mainstream crowd. You can get away with playing techno, yet for a techno crowd, you can't get away with playing poppy stuff.
Right, which is interesting. I mean, in a way, that's no disrespect to a techno head. You know, if that's what you love, more power to you. But it is just sort of the reverse of the way I always thought it would be. You know.
Yeah.
And so for you, once you moved into this more mainstream rap, I mean, we're saying mainstream, but
Yeah.
you're still making
well,
kind of indie, interesting dance
Yeah, but with the
music.
videos and everything, and being on local MTV and that sort of thing, it was mainstream for sure.
And did that open up a new audience, I would imagine, for you,
Yeah.
new opportunities?
Absolutely, but it was a shock. It was a shock. In 2003, I was still really cool in the Amsterdam underground. They were like, "Okay, so Luke changed his sound, but he's cool. He makes Daft Punky type of music. It's awesome." So in 2003, I made the Dance Valley anthem. Dance Valley was the biggest festival in the Netherlands. I made the anthem, and I crossed over with that track and hit the #1 spot in the national charts.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden, I wasn't cool anymore to the Amsterdam underground.
Yeah, right.
And I came back to those people and I said, like 3 weeks ago, you guys gave me an award for being like the coolest cat around, and now because all of a sudden my track crossed over, I'm not. But I'm still the same guy, still play the same music, and that was a harsh reality for me because this was actually the first time I could say I've made it. I'm here. I've conquered my goals. Like I couldn't
yeah,
even.
it's a tangible achievement.
Yeah, like I couldn't even walk the streets anymore. I was in the Netherlands. People knew me, but it sucked because with the amount of following I gained, I got so many haters back, and I didn't understand that. I never raped anyone's cat. I never insulted anyone's grandmother. Like I was still a good guy, you know?
Right.
And yeah, it was a shock, and I never anticipated that.
It's strange how people can have such sort of instinctual, visceral reactions to art that way, you know?
Yeah.
And especially if they're expecting one thing and you give them a different thing.
Yeah.
The response you can get out of a person, it's very strange that way. I mean, we see that even now with, internet trolling and comments and all of that,
Yeah.
where just sort of based off of one thing an artist does, maybe just because they felt like doing it or they wanted to explore something, the majority of people listening to them can lose their minds. And I always wonder about that. I wonder what that is inside of people that brings that reaction. And maybe it's just people like things to stay the same.
Absolutely. I have noticed that because...
Nobody likes change, I guess. Or maybe everybody appreciates change, but nobody likes it when it's happening to them.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that, and even in, people in their begin 20s, 80% of them are very conservative, always. It's just something within people. But us as artists, we always strive to not be that conservative and to not be stuck in that pigeonhole.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, you're right that as artists, we probably do have a different perspective because not only with our own art, but we see our peers working on things and it's always changing, it's always evolving. And I think anyone who's been in this industry long enough knows that if you just keep doing the same thing over and over, you won't have a very long career. We almost have to evolve in order to keep doing what we want to do.
I would just be very bored, really.
Yeah.
Still doing the same thing. Because at a certain point, it becomes really easy to make a sound as well. But even, with the sets, with the DJ sets, with the track list already in order and that sort of thing, I don't know how other people do that. Like that must be the most boring thing in the world.
Right, pre-planning the sets.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting issue, especially now because with the rise of festival culture in the States, we are seeing a lot of DJ sets that look and sound the same, sort of one after another. There is plenty of the pre-planning, and I don't know about pre-recording, but there's more planning than it used to be. And I know you as well as I sort of come from the culture of that you just show up with a bunch of tracks and kind of play what feels right in the moment. But then again, and I don't know if this is true for you, if you have adjusted the way you played to sort of accommodate that festival culture. But for me personally, I have kind of found a middle ground with it where, if I know I'm going to play a bigger show on a bigger stage, I'll usually know maybe the first few tracks I want to play, maybe the last few tracks I want to play, and probably, a good bunch that I know I want to get in there at some point. And for me, that's kind of where I've settled with it. But did you ever either feel the pressure to change what you were doing or actually sort of modify the way you approached it?
Well, so fair enough. Your way is basically the old way as well, where I would have sessions before a show of 2 or 3 hours of crate digging, going through all my collection and grabbing the tracks I would think work. Yeah, I would used to carry 70 vinyls, and from those 70, you could shuffle them up and do something different with it, or adapt. And no, I had 2 or 3 years ago, Tomorrowland wanted to do an amazing fireworks show. Would take up about 10 minutes of my set.
Right.
And if I could pre-record something and give that to them. And I said, screw you. And
they must have loved that.
Yeah. No, homie don't play that. Homie doesn't do that. I was like, no way. I just told them, let me know when the fireworks begin and I'll notice that and maybe I'll adapt to that.
How did it go?
They ended up not doing it. Yeah.
They weren't comfortable.
I guess.
Yeah.
And I didn't care. I had an EDC once where I played before all the lights went on, before all the pyro, but that sort of thing really motivates me to really come out with such an energetic set that we don't care if it's dark. We just dance. And in the end, I up until now I have not seen one tweet of a raver saying how amazing the pyro or the visuals of so-and-so show was. With people investing so much money and time into exactly syncing the visuals, it's still all about the music, and that makes me really happy.
I think that's true. I mean, I think my only counterpoint to what you just said is, at least personally, I've seen 1 or 2 shows where it almost felt more like an immersive experience, And I'm sure I'm thinking of guys like Porter Robinson or something like that, where it's probably is mostly pre-planned when he's doing these, giant stage show kind of things. But to me, I almost take those shows in a different perspective.
Yeah.
For me, it felt new. It felt interesting. It was maybe something I hadn't seen before.
So what I'd love to opt for, what I'd love to see is that, especially with Porter Robinson and guys like Zed as well, and Zed knows my opinion about his shows, they're more like artists. They don't need decks. Why does Zed need decks? He doesn't even have decks. He has a controller. Why doesn't he come there with his Ableton, with his producer gear, with his piano? That guy can rock the piano.
Very talented.
Why aren't the producers performing as producers? That's the benefit they have over DJs. Let the DJs be DJs. Let the producers be producers. Yeah, it would be amazing to see Porter Robinson live. Everything synced and yes, a track list just like bands and that sort of thing. They are more artists than DJs, in my opinion.
I think it's very hard in today's culture for people to separate the idea of producer and DJ, and that they've kind of been intertwined in a way that I think is sort of hard to reverse.
Yep.
Because like we've been talking about the whole time, back in the day, you could be just known for your DJing. You could become famous for being a good DJ. There were DJs who were very famous. I mean, Carl Cox is a good example, who was never really known for the tracks he was producing.
Yep.
He did produce and he made some cool tracks, but it was the reason he was Carl Cox was because he was a DJ. And that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Because for me, I was a DJ first, and so I came to production late. But now that I've done that, I spend probably more time in the studio making music than I do practicing DJing. For me, it was just personal evolution. For you, how much time, I guess I'm interested in your time management in general, like we were saying earlier. How much time, I know you're a fast producer. You can make a song quickly. Have you always been that way where you
No,
could?
not at all. So before we dive into that,
Yeah.
I do want to
I
preach.
just said a lot
I
there.
do want to preach a little.
No, please.
I wish and I hope that new talent, and maybe new talent is listening right now, the amount of hours spent in learning production, I would love to see all those hours and time spent into DJing as well. Because there's so much more to DJing than people see on the festivals. The depth of it is so beautiful and so incredible. And when you can master that, there's so many things you can learn and just stick the time into it. Some people ask me, like, how did you get so technical? I practiced for years and years and years, every single night,
Right.
every single scratch, and
you seem like a person who really likes to sort of, if you're interested in something, you're going to go all in.
Well, this is the thing as well, and I don't understand how people get it twisted. So if you call yourself an architect, then one would think you would know every aspect of architecture, right? If you call yourself a scientist or any scientist, like a biochemist, looking at my girlfriend here who's a scientist, if you call yourself a biochemist, then I would assume you would know everything about biology and the chemical substances of that sort of thing.
Right.
So if you call yourself a DJ, I would expect you know more than just mixing intros into outros. Same goes for producing, and yeah. So if in that sense, if I want to call myself something, I will go and discover every aspect of it. For sure.
No, you're right about that. Maybe we should talk a little bit about, we went back and then we went forwards, but there was this moment kind of when I first became aware of what you were doing, and a lot of your music was right in that sweet spot of maybe 2006 to 2008, right when the Dutch scene and the American scene started colliding. I remember, back in those days, people like A-Trak and Diplo and, started making connections with people like you and people like Afrojack.
That's right.
And how did you experience that moment? I guess I don't even want to talk too much about it because you were there.
Yeah.
And what was your experience of kind of those two scenes coming together? Do you have any sort of early flashes of those memories?
It was amazing. I have waited for such a long time for electronic dance music to break through America. So yeah, we had it in the 90s in Europe. And it took about 15 years for it to ripen in the States. I remember playing a Vegas show in 2007, and we're recording this in Ryan, my good friend, studio in San Diego. But Ryan was there in 2007 where people didn't know me. I was playing in Vegas at the pool, and they were asking me if I could stop playing house and if I could play more Britney Spears. Not my friend. My friend liked house music. More Britney Spears and more rock music. They didn't have a clue. Yeah, so for it to finally start, and I remember getting the email in from A-Trak, and obviously me being a DJ geek and have watched many turntable lists, and I am such a fan of all turntable lists. Shout out to anyone that can scratch and does miraculous things with the turntables. But he emailed me. He's like, "Hey, I'm A-Trak. You may not have heard from me, but I'm multiple DMC chat." And I was just, my mouth fell open. I was like, "Oh my God, this is the guy with the Missy routine that I love."
That's so funny that he would list his resume.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't even finish reading the email, and I just instantly replied, "Yes, yes, yes. Come to Amsterdam. We'll make a track together." And with Diplo, it was a little bit different because I heard from Diplo through my friend Junior Sanchez, who tipped him as this new and up and coming crazy producer. And back then he was making a lot of Baltimore, like B-more stuff, and that was his thing. It was such a revolutionary sound. And then he kind of crossed over into the more hip hop sounds. He did the MIA, the Paper Planes, and everything. And then he reached out to me to make a track, and I was like, yeah, man, let's do it.
Was it different working with the two of them, with their processes? Did you actually get together with them, or was it online?
Fun fact, and you guys probably know, but I didn't realize Diplo is so chaotic.
Oh, yes.
Like he had a tremendous amount of scratches on it, or sketches on his laptop. Yeah, he was just pulling one another out, and he was like searching for sounds, and everything was just on his desktop, and it was like, but it was such a fun process. But we got super creative with it. So our track is called "Hey." We finished the session. He kind of went back with like, I don't even know what we did
right.
here. And he went back and he had his doubts about the track, and it was even too crazy for him. And I started playing it out and worked really well on the dance floor. And yeah, we just went with it.
I don't know. That's the way, I think that's just the way he operates in general, man. It's what I was saying at the very beginning. It's this controlled chaos that to me, I get stressed out even just looking at it. But for him, it works. He's just a machine. He's a maniac that way.
And A-Trak was very different. A-Trak was very organized. Came in with a plan. He was like, I want to bring back the old Chicago sound. We got to have toms as the bass line and that sort of thing. We might need to add some of your Dutchy sounds.
That makes sense that he would come in with sort of a fully formed idea.
Yeah, so it was a very different experience. So the track we made is called Shake It Down. And fun fact, it's him on the vocals, running it through my chain I use for Break Down the House for the vocal I did on it.
Oh, yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite tracks at the time, man. I was playing that everywhere. And for you, it seemed like, you and a lot of Dutch compatriots were sort of entering the US scene in a more major way, right? Kind of a level up at that time. And I started seeing your name everywhere. What was your experience, getting into the always on tour lifestyle and having that sort of major tectonic shift where all of a sudden you're on a plane every day?
Yeah.
Was that something you were ready for, excited for? Did you enjoy it at first?
I wasn't ready for it, and I wasn't enjoying it.
Okay.
Because I love being home. I adore being home. I have my routines. I have my set routines. As we spoke before, I'm very according schedules and everything. And that completely changed. All of a sudden, I was never home.
Right.
I missed my studio. I missed my friends. I missed my parents. And a lot of kids don't see this side. They think, obviously it was amazing to actually play at the shows and to get this amount of opportunities. But being away from home, being away from your routines, away from people that know your culture, trying to get used to always speaking English.
Right.
Eating different food, being in different time zones. It was crazy. Like, it took me 2 years to finally get into a mode that I could accept. So, fun fact, now when I tour, I do have my little routines.
Right.
I always sit on the right side in the back of a car while being driven, for instance. I always have my window seat in the airplane. Those type of routines just keep me...
Little comforts.
Yeah.
Familiar things.
Out of anxiety, I would even say.
Did you get a lot of anxiety when you really started, just flying everywhere all the time?
I did. At a certain point, I felt like I couldn't keep up. And I remember doing one of the heaviest summers ever in 2010, just show after show after show. And this was, I would play until 4, and then at like 5:30, I would be out to the airport again, doing 2 flights, 2 3-hour drives, play the show, because I would arrive at like 11 p.m., play the show, and then hopping on another plane.
Right.
And day 12 of this summer tour, I stopped my tour manager going into the airplane. I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not getting on this plane. And he's like, but I was like, I don't care. I'm like, I was like, normal people sleep until like 6 a.m. and then they get up and go to work. I was DJing I was working until 4. Like, why am I up earlier than those people? Like, I didn't get it. And it was funny because on that trip as well, so another 3-hour drive, through the mountains somewhere in Europe. 2 flights, very long day, 3-hour drive. We get to the hotel, and he's like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, we have 1.5 hour of interviews right now."
Oh my God.
And I fired him there and then.
That's amazing.
Shout out to Tony. Yeah. Tony and I still speak to each other, but yeah, that was bad.
Wow. So he did eventually get you on the plane. He did get you
Yeah,
to the
he
show.
did get me on the plane, yeah.
Yeah. Those moments are always so interesting to me because I think from a listener perspective, it's very easy to sort of gloss over all of the hard times and the fact that we as people, sometimes you have a good day, sometimes you have a bad day, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. But as a performer, you're the same every night. You're there 100%. And dealing with that lifestyle, everyone finds their own peace with it. It sounds like for you, routine became very important, scheduling your time. Obviously, I know we talked before we started recording about the Kung Fu and the fitness that you do. Were there any other things that you sort of found along the way to sort of help you, get back to really enjoying it and get back to sort of why you liked it in the first place?
Well, and this is the thing as well. What it comes down to is the basics. The basics of DJing to me is going in as a blank, trying to catch the crowd. There's always a few moments on a night where you've massaged a little bit of that group in the room, massaged a little bit of that group in the room, and then at a certain point, they are all ready, and you grab them, and you take them to the next level. And that's the magic. Sometimes it doesn't happen.
But you're completely right. I love that you said that because that really, it's about the moment, right? Yeah. It's about being in the moment, being present, not worrying about the 20 hours of travel you just had. Yeah, and now that you say that, I mean, that's for me absolutely true. I think maybe I'm even addicted to that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's when you nail it.
Right.
And that's when you get the people like smiling to you and it's like, yeah, we did it. You and you dancing and me picking out the music. Yeah, you make
that connection with people. Do you think, this may be completely off base. You were saying earlier that you had all of these, summers alone by yourself or that you had trouble making friends at a certain point. And for me, I feel that moment of connection with a crowd, and I think that does get me closer to maybe something I always wanted. And I was an awkward kid, most of us were. We were all nerds. And so for me, I do get that human connection out of it too, that maybe that's the way I found to get what I needed out of it. Do you think that's true for you at all?
Good point. That's a really deep analysis. I've never gone that deep. So thanks for that. But so maybe that's why I'm such a nerd on Twitter as well. Twitter is my personal WhatsApp because I talk to everyone on there.
Right.
And I love communicating with everyone on there.
Well, and I think maybe that's what people really love is that if you are busy, you do take the time to still talk to people, which not a lot of artists do, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. So yeah, I just recently did the cover for the Dutch Men's Health shoot and that sort of thing. And, constantly being fit on tour and that sort of thing. And what my purpose with that is to inspire people that if I can do it, you can do it too. And I am no one special. I'm just a dude.
Yeah.
I'm just very determined. And I want people to understand that and get that.
Yeah, well, and that maybe brings me to the last thing I wanted to make sure we covered is that I wanted to talk about the community that you've created for musicians and for people who love this music over the years, between your music forum that you've operated for a very long time. And it's always funny because I talk to other people on this show. I had Diplo, and there was sort of two contingents, right? There was the holler board, and then there was the Laidback Luke boards. And usually, if you talk to anyone who started making electronic music in a certain era, they were on one or the other of those boards. When did you start the forum and your online presence? Because it seemed like you were pretty early on all of that.
Yeah, I was. So in 2001, we aired my website, and there was a guest book on it. And sure enough, there were a couple of people, beginner producers. I think one of them was even bingo players that started asking me producer-related questions. And I thought it was so fun to answer. I didn't have any secrets, if you want
Sure.
to make this or that type of lead or whatever, or how to compress. And we started chatting on there. And at a certain point, the guest book got so out of hand, like the threads were super long, we turned it into a forum with topics and that sort of thing. And every night I was on there spending at least 1.5 hours away from my wife and kids to train young producers. But amongst those young producers were a ton of professional names you know by now. And two of my best successors from there are Afrojack and Avicii.
Right.
And so I did set a precedent for a lot of the producers we know.
I had GTA on the show, and they were shouting you out a lot and shouting that
awesome.
forum a lot as, kind of where they really got their first shot and really found their first community. And there, like you said, there's a lot of those kind of stories. And I always appreciated that, it's especially in that era, there were not a lot of resources for people doing what we did.
So my motivation for that was coming up as a young producer myself. Apart from Chocolate Puma, I never got any response from any DJs or, no knowledge. And I promised myself that if I would make it one day, I would be that guy I was always looking for. So that really motivated me. And I remember she's now my ex-wife. Remember my ex-wife saying, why do you stick so much time? Like, do you make money off of this forum?
Right.
And I'm like, no.
Right.
I'm just sharing knowledge. I'm just helping these kids out. And so, but the same goes for my vlog as well. I purely started that as a hobby. Fun fact, it could be a very smart move. Right now, you see a lot of DJs having vlogs. But about 3 years ago, my 11-year-old son came in, and he's like, Dad, you got to check out my vlog. And I'm like, what's a vlog? And he's like, well, you got to check it out on my YouTube channel. And I'm like, what? You're 11 years old. You have
amazing.
A YouTube channel? So I had a look, and there he was, filming his life, recording everything on his little iPhone,
right,
and editing it. I was like, how did you learn this stuff? He's like, I just learned it myself. And then it hit me. I was like, well, if you can do it, then I can do it. And I sincerely hate all those DJ after movies where the DJ walks out of his private jet in slow motion out to the festival, and there's like all confetti in slow motion, and it's like living. I was like, nah, man, I want to keep it real.
Yeah.
I want to do this, and I want to show people how it really is.
Yeah. That's when I had Kurt Flostradamus on the show, and he was saying a very similar thing about Instagram. He was like, why doesn't anyone put on Instagram like when their car gets towed?
Interesting, right?
Why doesn't anyone show the laying on the floor of the airport for 2 hours?
But that's apparently that's like a serious thing going on right now, where a lot of people compare their lives to the lives of people on Instagram.
Yes.
And they don't realize, that's only the good stuff on there. A lot of people get depressed by it. It's crazy. But so my vlog right now is very similar as to what I was doing with the forums, where I share my knowledge, and I have a ton of kids coming to me at my shows, and they don't even talk about my new single. They say, I watch your vlogs every single week. Right. And it was you that started me DJing through your vlogs. And it's like a whole new world right now. And I am doing the vlogs absolutely for free as well.
Yep.
And it's such a blessing. People want to see that and listen.
Yeah, and I mean, along with Mixmash, your record label, which I think has been another big outlet, you always put on a lot of unknown or coming up producers. I'm always just impressed with sort of the inclusivity that you had from a really early time. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people, when they come up, they're worried about themselves, and it's very focused on them. And only after they've kind of gotten to a certain level, then maybe they'll kind of open it up. But it seems like for you were all along really looking to bring other people in.
So this is one of my problems as well, as being perceived on Twitter sometimes when I rant, is people think I do it out of spite or being frustrated or that sort of thing. And none of that. I am actually still that fan. I'm a fan of electronic dance music, and I want to be wooed by incredible DJs. I want to be blown away by incredible unknown tracks, and I am still that fan. And sometimes when I'm angry at the scene, it's not because I care about my personal success or anything. I would just love to be more excited about it.
Absolutely, man. As we kind of wrap all of this up, I think that's a good note to keep in mind. I just wanted to throw one anecdote out there, which I'm pretty sure you don't remember, but it was the first time, and maybe the only time since now, that I actually met you, which was in Chicago at Spring Awakening Festival. You were doing one of your Super You and Me stages, and I was playing on that stage very early in the day, and I played my set, and it was probably one of the bigger shows I had done up to that point. Had a blast. I remember Destructo was playing after me, and he came up wearing a Spider-Man mask, and then was angry that nobody else was wearing a mask. And then at the end, you came up in full, superhero costume. And I remember as you were kind of walking to the stage, I just sort of stopped you, which, you probably shouldn't have done because you were literally going to play right at that time. And you were, just so open, and we had a little conversation, but it left an impression on me that you would take the time, in the middle of while you're obviously going to do something, to just talk to some guy you've never met about nothing. And I always appreciated that moment. And, after having this conversation, I think it really rings true to your character. And I'm just looking forward to what you're going to do next. And I guess that's where I'd like to leave it, is what should people be looking out for in the next year?
I recall that show. And I actually remember, as a fun fact as well, I remember going on a picture with two girls. I think it was from the same moment I walked from the toilets to the stage. So I spoke to you, and I took a picture with these two cute girls and walked onto the stage. 2 years later, I find out that's Cruella.
Oh, yeah, right.
Who weren't famous yet.
Yes.
But yeah, and so there's still a photo of that online somewhere. And yeah, so where next? Actually, I'm super excited because I am currently in the midst of reinventing my sound. And it's going to be familiar, yet very unfamiliar. It's going to sound like nothing out there. I found this synth no one is using.
Really?
And it's a tough beast to tame. But if I can nail it, then it's going to sound like nothing else. And I am actually going to focus on sounding like no one else.
Once we stop recording, I'll ask you what that synth is.
Yeah. So I'm excited. It's going to be a new wave. And some people ask me, oh, what kind of genre? It has nothing to do with genres. Within that sound, I can go poppy, I can go dance, I can go rave, And so I'm super excited about that. It's a bit of a struggle, but I do feel like I am, like my inspiration for this is kind of like Nike, like back in the end of it. And I see you wearing a Fila jacket. Like
yes.
When Fila took over, Nike was in the background reinventing themselves. And yeah, I want to be Nike, and I want to come back bigger, better.
I love all of that, and that sounds like another transitional moment like the ones we've been talking about this whole time. In 2018, where do you see yourself fitting into the greater landscape of dance music now? Because, I mean, like we've been saying, there's been this explosion in the States, and a lot has changed in the last few years.
There's a problem. There's a problem going on where new kids, and I see this in the Netherlands as well, new kids think trap and the rappers are cooler than us now. And especially in the Netherlands as well, where rap music has become super big on Moombahton beats right now, we almost feel like we're old. We're the old generation. We're the old generation of rockers. And we need to fix that. And I'm determined to make it cool again.
Well, and it seems like you're, hearing you talk and obviously just looking at your body of work, you've got this amazing single-minded focus to it. Yeah. And it's like you were saying that, your ex-wife was asking, why are you spending so much time on a useless forum, all of that. And that seems to be a theme that, you've just followed this for so long. Do you ever foresee yourself doing something else? Or even just slowing down the pace?
Yeah, obviously. So this reinvention would be like my end sprint. Like I'm 41 now.
Are we talking about an album? You thinking about
No, not yet. So I'm 41 now. Like, you know, I could keep this up until I'm 50 probably. But one of my dreams is becoming a kung fu teacher with a bunch of kung fu schools. And being a kung fu teacher, I can keep that up until I'm 90.
Right.
And it won't even look funny. Like, you know, if you have like an 80-year-old DJ behind the decks, it would look strange. But, you know, if I'm 80 and still doing amazing kung fu, that will look like cool as heck. Yeah.
Growing up, my next door neighbor was a karate master, and he had his own dojo. And now he's very, very old, but still, you know, runs the dojo. And yeah, you're kind of a badass at that point.
So I'll probably always make music, and ideally I'd slow down the touring and just cherry pick the shows that I'd like to do occasionally. But yeah, then the focus would be more on my kung fu. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, is anything we haven't covered? Anything else you want to get out there?
All good.
Yeah.
We covered a lot.
Yeah, I think we did, man. Well, thank you for sitting down and doing this. This was really cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Awesome stuff.
All right, peace.
Peace.
All right, that's the show. I want to thank Laidback Luke for taking the time to sit down with me. For everybody listening, there's so much to chew on in that conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Email me at backtobackpod@gmail.com. I want to hear your opinions. Hit me up at backtobackpod or at Willy Joy on social media. And don't forget to check out Laidback Luke's new collaboration with Steve Aoki called Time's Up that is out right now. Hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you next Tuesday. This is Willy Joy for Back to Back. Peace.